All righty, so good afternoon, everybody, and it is really my pleasure to host and moderate this event. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this conversation with artist Howard Hersh. This our second virtual exhibition, and we are very excited because we lost our real place due to COVID, as you can imagine. And so this is the best alternative. And I think our experiment is working and we kept our momentum. I also want to say that Howard uh, is a very prolific person, and what you're seeing here is just capturing the tip of the iceberg. And so there is so much more to it, but we just selected a small grouping. Less is more. Making the case for minimalism is a partial retrospective, as I said, and these works uh, have been have been selected or grouped into several themes. So I will just say that there is a lot that we are covering, and there will be a broad explanation for each of the sections. And I will be asking questions, and of course you keep a track of them as well. Uh, what I'm expecting today uh, that you will be also engaged and will chime in with your questions. So the first section begins with on becoming an artist. Then the second section is about your art practice. Then the series of his sculptural paintings or 3D paintings as you see them. And normally we see CD when we talk about 3D, three-dimensional, we normally see it either on the wall or on the floor, or sometimes from the ceiling. And then we will discuss the context of minimalism, because that's how I frame this exhibition. And then we will have a number of questions that deal with how the art world works. And this is a mystery to so many people, including the artists, and there is a difficulty. How do we break into the art world when you are an artist or beginning collector and so forth, because can be very intimidating. And this whole exhibition is taking place during, I already call it the post-COVID environment. So there was a whole year that preceded it, and that probably contributed to the productivity of our friend here, Howard Hersh. So let me begin my first question. Are you ready, Howard?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I just want you to start with your background, and I apologize for people who have heard that before in our last panel a few months ago, but it's always worth reminding everybody. And I just want to give a little bit of advice in case you are nervous or shy, and this is attributed to the advice that Louise Bourgeois once said. So I'm repeating and saying, tell your own story and you will be interesting. So go ahead, no pressure.
Well, this time I'll skim over a little quicker. As a kid, if I look back at what interested me as a kid, everything would have told me I would be an artist. In those days, of course, I didn't realize that, and I didn't even suppose that it was possible. So as I went through school and I realized being an artist would mean teaching, it didn't really appeal to me. So even though that was my only interest, I didn't pursue it in an academic way. It wasn't until my early 30s that the urge to make art really came back strong. And I'm a big believer in the right time in the right place. And I think that was clearly the case. Because I moved to Santa Fe really to try to be an artist when I was 36. And it happened very quickly, actually. And again, I think it was the right time for me, the right time in the art world, and geographically, Santa Fe was a good place to begin. So that's
Yeah, it
it.
seems like the environment there and the culture was a key to plunging in and really making a beginning.
Well, Santa Fe is known for people that are reinventing themselves. Many people move there after a divorce or a big life change, and it's a large art community, and it was a great place in those days. I had a lot of friends my age that were all trying to do what I was doing, and by and large, it worked for a lot of us.
Mhm. Okay, so now I am moving to our second section, and the second section is about art practice. And each artist has a different art practice, and I'm just very much interested to that you tell us what does your art practice entail. And I know that we are there in the background, we see your studio.
Right. Well, the studio is, I see it as the core of my my being as an artist. And I think for really, I would say for all artists, it's where our inspirations happen. We're surrounded by our work. And what I do is I show up every day. Uh, Whether I'm actually working on something or studying what I had done the day before. I show up every day and I get a lot of pleasure out of it because it is my favorite thing to do, be in the studio and make things. So I don't think of it as work. It's just what I do.
Okay. So what aspect of your practice you like most and what do you dislike?
Well, I just like being stumped by a piece. You know, that eats at me. Usually, I work on one piece at a time. So if a piece is problematic, it drags me
Do you
along
mean by
for.
problematic? What do you mean by problematic?
Well, I don't think it's finished. Something's bothering me about it, but I'm not sure what. Uh, One thing I've found that's a warning sign when I'm working is if I love a piece right from the beginning, uh, I find that that's hard because I'm not sure if my eye is not critical enough and I'm just enchanted by a piece or whatever. But sometimes
It
it can.
comes from your gut feeling, in other words.
Yeah, if it goes so well, you might be missing something. So, anyway, usually every piece involves a little mini struggle,
Okay.
and I like that part of it.
Mhm. There will be another question in another section where we will continue with this topic more or less about being stuck and also what is the criteria for deciding what is a good painting. And you don't have to judge yours. You can also judge some others. So we will go back to that. I just want to continue with art practice. So I'm under the impression that you had some commissioned work, commissioned painting. And when I speak to artists, and from what my understanding is, that commissioned works are very, very different from when you are just producing without trying to please anything but yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the issues with commissioned work? Maybe it worked very well for you, I don't know. And that commission work is also very characteristic of architects. And I know that many architects are not very pleased by commissioned work, but that's their job and that's their career. That's what they signed up for. So please tell us about your experience with commissions.
Well, I will say they are difficult and challenging, but as an artist, you don't say no. You take a challenge and you work with it. In general, a commission is based on an existing piece of the same artist. So in a sense, we have a head start on it. It's our own work that we're reproducing. What is the most ideal is if it's a very recent piece that the client is interested in, and perhaps it's just the wrong size. So that feels like a current piece that I can work on. The really hard ones are when a client finds a piece of mine, maybe 10 years old, and wants me to make another one like that. That's very hard. And I've done it, but
yeah,
not fun.
Yeah, so that's what we hear anecdotally, that many artists don't like to repeat themselves. Okay, so we learned something from you, and it corroborates what we heard here and there. So now from commissioned work, I am moving to public art. And public art is also an area that is very, very difficult, and it's highly specialized and so forth. So I want you to, I don't know if you had any experience with that, and what is it that you know about public art, the bureaucracy and so forth, because normally it involves an institution or the city or a committee or something like that. Go ahead.
Well, you're right on all those counts, and I maybe for those reasons I have not applied or done any public art, unless you count a commission that I've done that's open to the public, but that's different. It's also public art also means working with a team, other people. Fabricators. It's a team effort, and I do prefer to work alone. So I have shied away from that. Yeah.
Okay, but I really wanted to make a distinction between the commission work and public art. And also we see a lot in the city. And if you don't like a particular public art project, it means that it went through a process of the taste of the commission and of the of that commission that asked you to do it, and then it is really a matter of compromise. Would you agree with that?
I don't have that much experience with public art, but I'm sure I know that it's very specific, and
well, and it can be very controversial. And we saw last year there was a controversial part because of Maya Angelou's sculpture that was done by Lava Thomas. Sure. And so, it's a public art and so forth. Okay, so now What advice did you get when you told your parents about becoming an artist? And what advice would you give to an artist who is just starting their career? And we know that right now we are going through the season of graduation. So we have many new artists with a lot of um, aspirations and ambition. So what advice would you give them? And also tell us about your experience.
Uh, well, my experience was pretty unique. I mean, I really didn't decide to try to be an artist until my early 30s. So that's when my parents would have heard about it. And at that point, I'm sure they knew better than to give me advice. They just were happy for me. And they knew that that was what was really in me. And I'm sure they wished me well. What I used to tell young artists was try to have works on paper, because that's how I really took off, working with art consultants, corporate jobs, where works on paper were monotypes usually is what I did. So I can't really, I couldn't say that would be the same good advice now, with digital prints taking over everything. It's hard to say what I would tell a young person now, except, be ready for a tough go at it. Things are not easy now. And probably another skill would be a good thing
Yeah,
to go along with the art.
I think this is good advice, and studies have been done about those who graduate from art academies and art schools, that only 5% of them will make a living from the art that they.
I'm sure that's probably a high number even. It depends what you mean by making a living at art.
Well, that's all you do, that
Nowadays,
you don't have 5 jobs, teaching and being a waiter or a bartender and all of
right.
that. So that's
But
all
I
you
mean,
do.
there are fields in art, graphic arts, video artists. The field has really expanded along with the internet. So there's ways to be in the art field and your foot in the digital world too at the same time. So that's probably how most young people are entering the art world.
Okay. So I'm going back to that question of, let's say, I'm sure that you have friends, colleagues, you meet artists, and sometimes they say, I am stuck. So how do you unstuck yourself? And it can be in writing, it can be, you hear it from many creative people.
Sure. Um, for me, getting stuck would mean I've exhausted the enthusiasm I have for a series, even if it's very successful and I'm happy with each piece. Uh, it feels like it's kind of done, or it's topping out and it's time to move on, but I'm not sure where to go. So that can be that's my particular feeling of being stuck. But as far as actually physically stuck, I'm never there because, like I said, I show up at the studio, and even if it means sweeping, straightening up, doing something at the desk, I'm in the studio and I'm ready to do things. You have to put yourself in the place to be able to work and not sit home and just worry about being stuck.
Okay. Uh, well, I heard what you said before was that you work on one painting at a time. And it is also possible that if you work on more than one piece at a time, then you can go back or refresh, or it's one way of getting unstuck. So do you have
Let
you
me
tried
explain
it?
that. I'll explain that a little better then. I do usually work on one piece at a time, but I've almost always worked in two different styles or mediums. I always have, like when I worked in wax, I did oil paintings too. Now that I'm doing 3D work, I do 2D also. So I always have two kind of parallel series going on. They relate to each other, but they're different. And it gives me a chance not only to let paint dry, but just refresh the intent and the execution of what I'm working on.
Okay, that is a pretty good explanation and gives us more insight into your art practice. And then I want to ask you a question about what are your criteria for judging a good painting? And you can apply it to your own painting. When do you deem it to be good? And also when you go to, let's say, to other artist studios or an art gallery or even an exhibition in a museum, and you say, well, I don't think it's such a good painting. Oh, this is a great painting, and let me see what I can steal from this technique or something like that. So tell us, what is it that we should be looking for? Can we be judges of a good painting? And is it really subjective?
Well, I will answer it in two parts. About my own work, let's call it a great painting would be one that I feel like is better than the one before it, the best I've ever done. So that would be the pinnacle of what I would call a good painting of my own. As far as other people's work, I
What
look
do
at
you
the work.
expect? Talk about the expectations.
I look at the context of what I'm looking at. In other words, the style the person works in, the medium he uses, the intent. So I judge it on the basis of the niche that it fits in, and I compare it to others that are in that niche. But overall, I look to see, let's put it this way, the longer I look at something, the more pleased I am with it. And I think a lot of people are like that. Sometimes I walk through an exhibition quickly, and other times I linger, and it's hard to know why I'm attracted to a piece sometimes, but you can definitely measure it by how long you look at it. So,
Okay.
and it is very subjective. I don't ever say, make a judgment, good or bad. I'll say, you know, that one really looks finished. That's really resolved. That artist, that's a successful piece, even if it's not something I would want to do.
Okay. Then I want you to talk also about your evolution as an artist and how did you get from there to here? So what type of um, uh,
Day to day,
reincarnations you went through?
just, you know, day to day, year over year. Um, it's like all of our lives, you know, they grow, we grow and develop. Uh, you know, we eliminate things that aren't working and stick with things that are. Uh, and in my case, as an artist, I get to do things for myself that really interest me, really attract me, and things that I want to make. So it's and that keeps changing. So I go with what feels good.
Okay, so it seems like there is some progression and some evolution. Okay, now it takes me to the third section of our conversation today, and it's about your series. So let's look at, let's discuss them. And for people who don't know you, what happened is that you made the big transition from being a painter who painted in encaustic, and that was your signature style for a very long time. And this is when I met you. And then now you have made a major pivot. And so tell us, how did this happen? How that transformation occurred? And speak about uh, the blurring of what we see. Tell us what we are seeing, and also talk about what it means to blur our disciplines.
Okay, you've asked a lot of questions there.
It's one question, one big question.
The encaustic work really just exhausted itself. I stopped doing it a couple times, kept going back to it. Then, because encaustic is usually very textural, it started getting me thinking more about the work as objects instead of as pictures of things. And in that way, I tried, I believe it was about 2011, 2012, I ordered a couple hundred very small panels, all different sizes. And I was determined to combine them into sculptural modular configurations using the encaustic. And I thought they were somewhat successful, but I didn't see a way to scale them up. They were all very small. And due to the weight and the fragility of wax, it just felt like I was hitting a dead end. And yet I wanted to expand the idea of my artwork as a sculptural object. And I started thinking about how I could, what I could do to change. And I was ready to drop wax, so that wasn't an issue. I thought about when I was a kid, I made a lot of models with soldering brass tubing and brass sheeting, and wasn't so interested in metalwork. And then I thought about wood, and I have more of a connection with nature, and it felt like wood would be a great thing to work with to build structures and armatures for the paintings. And that's what happened. I started. I got some milled wood, and I really learned woodworking enough to make what I wanted, and that's what I've proceeded to do for almost 10 years. I started that series.
Okay, so now I want to get to some of the foundational work, and you have certain terms that are associated with these works. So tell us a little bit uh, about the grid or the scaffolding or structures. What do each of these terms mean to you, and how should we understand them?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from just an innate interest in architecture that I've always had. So that's kind of that's like an underpinning for the way my brain works. So I see structure as it's an abstracted architectural element. And I use the grid as part of that, as like a grid being a basis and where other shapes evolve from. So yeah, they're not total sculptures because I'm still painting. So they're a hybrid painting and sculpture. Most are on the wall. You can see the one in back of me, which is 5 feet tall, and it does hang on the wall, but it also sits on the floor nicely. And that's why I set it in back of me. So I enjoy blurring the lines. The paintings have turned into pictures of structures, and then the wall sculptures are more painted structures, painted sculptures.
Mhm. The reason why I'm saying it, because for a very long time, sculpture was sculpture, and visual art paintings were two-dimensional, were very different. And now it's not that it just started now and with you, but attempts were already made to blur the two disciplines. Okay, so that's the
Well,
point.
not only the mediums, but or rather, it is the mediums like fiber, clay. All those have become very much a part of art making now. So there's a lot of blurring going on.
Okay. So now let's just go into the different series, and okay, so let's go to the first one, and the first one is called Axis Mundi. So Howard, can you talk about this series, which is one of the earliest one in when you make that break and you start the three-dimensional?
Well, actually, I think the Axis Mundi, yeah, I suppose it was simultaneous with the Skin Deep. That's the structural series. Again, I think it goes back to my desire to always do two different things that relate but are very different. So, like I said, the Axis Mundi are really focus on painting and drawing, and they are indeed pictures of structures. And of course, the Skin Deep series, the dimensional works are structures themselves. So,
Can you tell us a little bit about choosing the term Axis Mundi?
well, that refers to the meeting of heaven and earth, and you know that's a pretty abstract concept nowadays, and I take it to mean even intent and execution. You know, imagining something and doing it. That's where heaven and earth meet, so to speak. So that's where that title came from.
Okay.
Skin Deep, refers to the fact that I'm negating the expression that things are not skin deep. That by exposing the structure, the substructure of the painting, I'm showing there's always a lot more to look at than like, don't read a book by its cover.
Mm-hmm. So I also okay, go ahead.
Well, you can see the grid, you know, is expressed in the wooden framework and in the paint itself. So I really enjoy doing that in my artwork, is exposing layers,
Mhm.
whether they're physical or just almost tricks of the eye. I like to open up a painting and show the whole thing, start to finish.
Okay, I noticed on your website when I looked at them that sometimes the series overlap. Like you can be doing the skin deep and then you can do something else, like the excess mundi. And
Well,
that's why,
I
can, can you talk about that? How you go back and forth into
well,
this?
again, that's just the way I've always worked. I uh, I like jumping back and forth. The two different things always relate to each other, but they are very different. Like I said, ages ago, I did encaustic and oil painting, two separate things, and I've always liked doing that. Keeps things interesting,
Okay,
fresh.
so yeah, so now we are transitioning to the third series in this one, and we have migration. So talk about what do you mean by migration?
Well,
Talk about these pieces.
usually my titles are double meanings, and in this case, of course, the word migration is not only a very loaded political word, but it has a lot of meanings. So for me, migration refers to the way I go back and forth, whether it's painting to sculpture, geometry to organic shapes, very colorful to black and white. That's all migration in my mind. Um, my practice is migrating from one style to another, for, between individual pieces. So it's a word that definitely catches a lot of attention because it's so political, but
Yeah.
that wasn't my intent.
Okay, so now when I look at the pieces and maybe some other people, so we always want to compare it to somebody else in the canon, or saying, oh, this looks like Sol Lewitt. Oh, this reminds me of Frank Stella, who did three-dimensional. This is more like Sol Lewitt, for example. So can you talk about who are the artists that inspire you, or where you see some affinity
Hmm.
in let's say, and of course, each artist, like Ellsworth Kelly, is also three-dimensional. He did it. His paintings, three-dimensional, are wall pieces. Sometimes it's on the floor. But and then Frank Stella, of course, he has also worked on three-dimensional. So, and it's very different. But the fact that I really wanted to bring an example and contextualize it, or put you in the family of these artists. So can you talk about that?
Boy, that's hard to draw a line from my work straight to someone else's.
No, I
Um,
know, but there is that element that
yeah, I mean,
want to
we
have that conversation.
sure, and we were influenced by so many things that we absorb, we take in. Um, I can tell you one of my favorite artists now is Leonardo Drew, who does mostly wood constructions, wall sculpture with pretty minimal black and white painting. Uh, I've met him briefly, and he's just a super guy. And so I admire him personally, and his work ethic and what he produces. So he's one of my favorites. But, you know, it changes over the years. Decades ago, when I was more interested in pure painting, it was people like Gerhard Richter, Sigmar Polk, you know, where I just really admired the beauty of their paintings. And now I'm looking more at, like you brought up Frank Stella, you know, there's a guy who has really continued to evolve and into similar to myself, mostly 3D. So he's big in my eyes. Judy Pfaff, who does big installations. Sarah Z, also an installation artist. So I'd say now I'm more interested in people that use and combine different materials more than pure painting.
Okay. So now let's go to the next one, and that is the roundabout. So what is the roundabout?
That is my newest series. And I saw the work evolving sculpturally, but I wanted to pull back on the wood framework and the exposed woodwork, and make more floating objects that you really felt were objects, but actually were pretty flat paintings. These are totally flat, the surface, although they float off the wall about an inch.
Okay, the other thing, privately we talked before about color palette, and also your preferences. So speak about your relationship to color.
Well, it used to be I was very hooked on warm colors, yellows, reds, orange, and I still lean to that. But I think because I think more sculpturally now, that I find more meaning in shapes than in colors. So I'm more inclined to paint monochromatically and even black and white. So that's the direction I'm going, but who knows? You know,
Okay,
things change.
so that brings me to the topic of minimalism, because most of the criteria that we see, also minimalism is expressed by using just a very limited color palette. And so I want you to talk about the fact, how do you relate to minimalism of the 60s, and how does this movement resonate with you? And I will just, okay, so just talk about minimalism, the way this exhibition has been framed and curated.
Well, let me just kick it off with just a little story. Decades ago, an artist friend came into my studio, and let me just say, I really admire the fellow and his work, and I really looked up to him. Anyway, he stood in front of a bunch of paintings I had just finished, and he said, "Well, the only thing I don't see is the kitchen sink." And I'll never forget him saying that. You know, we're talking like 30 years ago. So I've always really packed my work a lot, you know, layers and complexity. And what my friend said and my desire over the years to just be more clear, I have attempted to simplify and make the message more clear, more apparent to people and to myself, really. I mean, it's a simpler, cleaner look, more monochromatic to me is what's pleasing now. So I use what's pleasing to me as a real guide, and I trust that instinct, and that's the direction I'm going.
Okay, also, when I was thinking about minimalism and when I was writing this curatorial statement, so I very much reflected on what I know about you and your personality. And it's based on many of our conversations and just knowing you. So can you talk a little bit about how minimalism is figures in your life? And also, when I was writing in my conclusion, I made the observation that during our lockdown, we suddenly realized we don't need all the access. So speak about that from your point of view.
Well, personally, for me, the last year and a half, other than horrible news of death and suffering, of course, my life in the studio really did not change that much. Things definitely got slower. Shows were canceled or postponed. So, if anything, I felt I had more freedom actually in the studio, less demands. And so I think I probably slowed down my production, reflected more, used the time, the quieter time to really push the work forward and advance it. So I see
Okay.
it. I see simplifying, but I also see complexity that's built into it. So it's hard for me to think as of minimalism as what I do, but it is looking more and more that way.
Right. So I will just want to conclude this section before we move to our last and fifth section. And this is with a quote that I came across. And it's, of course, we cannot speak about art without mentioning Picasso. Okay, so what did Picasso have to say about minimalism? So he said, art is the elimination of the unnecessary. So it seems like it fits in what you are trying to say.
Uh, Definitely. And in fact, let me just stick something in. I was talking to a friend about gardening, and she was saying how hard it is. And I said, no, all you have to do is get rid of the stuff that looks bad. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, gardening and art making, not that far off. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then we have, I mentioned Kelly, and he's also, we discussed about, we talked about him here briefly, and also I mentioned him in the curatorial statement. So, and he, for 40 years, that's what he was. So Kelly Minimalism, he showed no interest in expressing emotion, creating concepts, or telling a story with his art. Kelly was interested in what happened in the act of viewing. He was curious about the space between the painting and the person looking at it. Kelly Minimalist used only isolated bright colors and simple shapes. And then we have Frank Stella when asked to describe his early paintings, and we're talking about the 60s. So he simply said, what you see is what you see. So he was very very minimalist in his response. So do you have anything to elaborate about these comments, or how much do you identify? And the question that I have for you, since we did speak about lockdowns and Corona, how much do you miss the fact that you don't get to see the viewer and interact with people who are, to see how they are reacting to your work?
Well, actually,
How important is it for you to have people looking at your art?
most of the time I get to watch people looking at my art is open studios, which of course we have not had. So that's been hard. But I do agree with the quote from Kelly that what happens between the viewer and the artwork is really, you could say, the artwork itself. And everyone sees it differently, and everyone creates their own picture in their head of what they're looking at. So art is definitely meant to look at. And the more people, the better. So I try to, I create for my own good, but I like to get it out of the studio, of course, for sales. But I do want people to see the work, and the interaction is important.
Okay, so now I am moving into the fifth section, and that's the last one. And there are a number of questions. And one of the important questions is right now on our minds. What changes do you foresee or wish to see in the post-COVID-19 world?
Boy, that's a big question. How about just fairness, people earning living wages, and more people finding satisfaction in life and what they can add to it?
Okay. Next question. What can you share with us about your experience with viewing rooms? You know, the virtual the virtual space that we are in, and this is it's a new platform that we are experiencing, which is very different from being in a physical space. And how important is it to engage with the viewer in the real time compared to viewing room, even though we know that a lot of people have visited our exhibitions 2 months ago, over 3,000. And right now we have over 300 people who looked into this exhibition that you are in. So yeah, so tell us about I know that eventually we will open the gallery space, and but I still think that the viewing room is very beneficial to us. So speak about how you feel about that.
Well, definitely the viewing room platform is good. It's clean, easy to read. I think you did a great job putting my show on it. In a way, virtual exhibitions are not that much different than people scrolling Instagram every day. It's more elaborate, of course, but
More sophisticated.
yeah, well, it's more complete. I mean, scrolling with your thumb through Instagram is, kind of hop skipping across everybody's work. But that is what people do nowadays. Having said that, though, of course, being in front of artwork in the flesh is the real deal.
Yeah.
And we can hope that things will now continue back in that direction. So.
Okay. So now as an artist, you know that sometimes you are lucky or subject to an art review or a critical review. So please talk about uh, art criticism in general. In these days, we don't have enough critics if we speak from the experience in this city. And how do you deal with rejection, or what advice would you give to somebody who comes to you, oh, I wasn't accepted, I didn't get a grant, and so forth. So how do, and rejections are experience, it's a human experience. So talk about how do you navigate that?
Well, actually, you were asking two questions, so I'm going to jump back to the first one, and that's critical review. In my opinion, critical review is important for the people that think it's important. Academics, other professionals that rely on the good words from a critic, or of course the bad words. So they do make a difference in certain circles. For me personally, I don't go out of my way to read art reviews. I just I do the work, and I try to improve my work by doing it, not by reading about other people's. And then regarding
Do you
rejection,
sorry, do you get criticism or any feedback from a person that is close to you? And I'm talking about your wife.
oh yeah, Joyce and I have a good art dialogue going. Uh, I've learned to ask her more and more about her opinions when I'm stumped, or even how she likes a new piece. So yes, I do like hearing what other people have to say. Um, my experience is that people are pretty shy, and they will rarely tell you what they're thinking, especially about something so personal as your artwork. So that doesn't happen too much. Rejection, the question of rejection, it's just built in. If you're an actor, if you're a writer, a painter, you're going to get rejected, and it's part of it. And you can get used to it, but it always hurts, and it depends who it's coming from. But I think it's human nature, and I've learned to just live with it, let it, and just get over it.
Okay.
So
So the next question that is very much of interest to me, and it has been, there were many articles written recently and during COVID about how much pressure is put on museums and how much they are changing. So, and so I want to ask you about how important are museums for artists and in terms of their collecting practices? And how important is it to the artist to be in a museum collection? Does it advance your career? Does it advance the value of your work? I think the general public will be interested to hear what you have to say.
well, I'll say yes to all those questions. Being collected or affiliated with a museum is prestigious, and people do read resumes, and it indicates a level of validation. So it's good. And I'm actually happy to share that just today, a museum of geometric art in Dallas is going to take one of my pieces for their collection.
Well,
So
Congratulations.
It doesn't happen very often, and I'm thrilled whenever it does. It's not something you can actually do a lot about. Museums are very hard to donate to because it's the liability, the insurance. They're really not looking for work in general. So it's pretty hard, but it
Okay.
is meaningful.
Okay, another question that I have, and this brings me to today's world, and how important is marketing these days as an artist. And if you don't have an agent, you have to do it all by yourself. And what type of tools do you use, and what are some of your strategies in order to be visible, and besides having an open studio, as you mentioned?
Well, I'd say, especially originally, galleries provided the exposure and advancing your career. Now, I'm not so sure that that happens as much. I mean, galleries are struggling themselves. Um, I use social media. I have quite a large following, and things have happened as a result of being on social media, good things.
Yeah. Okay.
So, a lot of people can see our work that way, but I still think galleries have an important part to play. Um,
Mhm.
it's a different level of exposure,
Mhm.
and you can it's an artist. We aspire to be in better galleries that can really show our work in the proper context and with the right intelligence and intent.
So now I come to that point where I want to open to the audience and see who has some questions to direct to you. Howard, is there a question that you thought I'll be asking you, and you wish I did?
Boy, I don't know. You had a pretty good list of questions. Um, no, I think you did a great job. I think we covered a lot of my background and how it came to be what I'm doing now, and I've tried to explain the different bodies of work that I do all at the same time. I I can't think of anything else we've
Okay.
missed really.
So
Um,
I think we almost came to an end, and I have some concluding remarks. So thank you, Howard, for your time and sharing with us your art and your thoughts about art practice, advice to upcoming artists who could benefit from your vast experience as participating artist. As for the art world and how it works, that part is easily beneficial to people who are not practicing artists as well. That world is still mysterious and hard to crack. Thank you for letting us into your private zone and sharing your thoughts of what it means to be an artist. This topic in itself could have been an entire session, or maybe even a book. So as crises have awakened a renewed realization that less is more, and highlighted how we are globally connected through a narrow lens, less is more examines your work, your personal philosophy of no separation with, we didn't even touch that, but maybe you will have still the time to comment on that, which is your guiding principle in life and art, to simply say it's all connected. Would you like to say something here?
Sure. That's really a long-standing belief of mine, and you can sum it up by thinking about them and us. I don't like that. Uh, Even as people, there's one race, the human race. And the more we look at nature, the more connected we see everything is, the environment, the unseen parts of nature. And it's a good, it's productive, and it's a good thing to realize how connected we are, because what we do resonates out and touches many things. So
Okay, so, and my last thank you is to you is for being part of the community and being an inspiration. And we at Root Table appreciate your commitment to the work we do here, and for being a friend and a colleague to me. It was a pleasure to work with you. And of course, I have to end with thanking everybody who is associated with Root Table, and to thank Margarita Muksinova, who has navigated this program. So once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing everybody in person. So thank you so much.